for people who are considering making a pitch with the largest strategic companies that exist, learning from watching somebody else's pitch based on the niche that they're going after in order to be successful. Technology and innovation, very excited to see inventors, investigators, entrepreneurs. That's fascinating, really providing guidance to people and companies and firms and entrepreneurs that want to develop products that address an unmet clinical need.
Welcome to The Pitch. My name is Anthony Viscogliosi, and I am one of the three Viscogliosi brothers, principals in the investment firm and the VB Co-Investor Network. I also have the great delight to be the moderator for today's program, The Pitch, which is a production of RRY Publications, LLC. The Pitch is where a panel of experts interview companies and inventors who are creating tomorrow's technologies today. We have the opportunity today to learn about a very interesting technology. And let me introduce our panelists who will help you learn about that technology. First, we have Audrey Beckman, formerly the Senior Vice President for Quality Initiatives at Zimmer Biomet, and currently an advisor and consultant to companies in the healthcare industry and venture investment funds. May I also introduce to you Dr. Scott Bruder, who is a scientist first and a founder and CEO of Bruder Consulting and Venture Group. Dr. Bruder has been Chief Technology Officer for multiple orthopedic businesses. Welcome, Dr. Bruder. And thirdly, we have Mike Sherman. Michael, it's a delight to have you here with us as well. Michael is President and CEO of MB Innovations, and who at one time had the title of the largest patent holder, being a Medtronic employee. So congratulations to you, Michael, for that. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you a very interesting idea. In investing and building businesses in the orthopedic space, one of the key areas of innovation opportunity, I believe, in the future will be and is today the field of infection control. Now, infection control begins with wearing a mask. And the whole purpose of infection control, particularly in an operating room environment, is to create an opportunity and a solution to prevent infection from occurring during a surgical procedure. Surgical site infections are one of the toughest healthcare problems to solve and are extremely costly to the healthcare system. What if there was a technology that could solve that infection problem and control infection, do it 2 times faster than it's being done in the world today? Well, we are going to be introducing to you Dimer UV. This is a company that has developed an infection management technology that does it 5 times faster than it's done today in an operating room. Let's roll the video and learn about this technology and this company.
Hi, I'm Dr. Art Kreidenberg, an orthopedic surgeon in Southern California, and I'm here to introduce you to Dimer UV and our new healthcare offering called the UV Hammer. What orthopedic surgeon can resist calling a device the hammer? It's really a whole new and way better way of looking at disinfecting an operating room. I hope you enjoy our brief pitch, and please reach out to me if you have further questions. Thanks.
We orthopods get frustrated with long turnover times between cases
We should, but often don't take charge of how well the OR is disinfected. Multiple studies show that workers miss more than half of contaminated surfaces in the OR, endangering our patients. What's so special about the UV hammer is that it eliminates the problems of other UVC machines, including distance, shadowing, and angle of incidence, by this fully adjustable wing where you can vary height and orientation with touches of buttons, much like operating an electric car window. The UV hammer technology is so different and novel it's covered by at least 8 US and international patents. This video shows just how powerful the UV hammer is by its ability to put the lamps in motion horizontal and close to the surface. The meter shows the UV hammer laying down 25 millijoules per centimeter squared. That's enough UVC to get a 99.9999% kill of all common SSI and PJI organisms. The other UVC machines sit a meter away from the table and require 5 to 10 minutes to achieve the same result. An independent study at a major Southern California hospital showed that the UV hammer is actually twice as effective at reducing the number of contaminated sites in the OR. And the UV hammer added significant additional decontamination after the use of chemicals. However, chemicals added nothing after UV hammer disinfection. So why bother with chemicals? This is a paradigm shift, much like going from a wet surgical scrub with a brush to now a quick alcohol swab. Not only is the UV hammer better than chemicals, but it took only 7 minutes instead of up to 45 minutes to disinfect the operating room. Now we're talking about money. This means less employee costs and the potential revenue generated by doing one extra case per day per room. The UV hammer is about half the cost of most competitive units and does a far better job far faster. Some basic quick specs: it's made in California, it's easy to push and operate, the battery swaps out. It's about half the cost of market leaders, and it's 4 to 5 times faster. That means far fewer units and people to operate them. We're super proud of our Dimer team and some of the awards we've received. We actually recently signed healthcare selling agreements with Medline and Honeywell to distribute the UV hammer. Dimer is actually new in healthcare, and we started in aviation, spun off our Germ Falcon aircraft disinfection system to Honeywell last year. It's now being used to disinfect aircraft on 4 continents. It was named one of Time Magazine's best inventions of 2020. It's actually a first for an orthopod. Thanks to the folks at OTW for allowing this presentation. Happy to take your questions now. Thanks.
Wow, that was really interesting, and congratulations on those awards that you've received thus far for this very interesting technology. I really like the way the video focused on the business solution: speed, lower cost, more efficiency. Today, telling us about the technology is the co-founder, Chief Innovation Officer, and Chief Technology Officer, Dr. Arthur Kreidenberg. With that introduction, let me please turn it over first to Dr. Scott Bruder.
Thank you, Tony, and congratulations. I think the highest level of recognition is when you are part of Saturday Night Live Weekend Update with Colin Jost. I would like to know what he said, but it's a fascinating recognition. I think that the example that we saw down the airline aisle is really fantastic because there's a clear need, there's an expectation of cleanliness without necessarily sterility. The question that comes to mind for me is when you're changing the angle, when you're moving the light source, it really depends on line of sight for this kill. And I'm wondering what kind of information you've been able to collect around surfaces that may not be clearly line of sight that could be sources of contamination for a surgical case.
First of all, the Saturday Night Live thing, they were actually making fun of Spirit Airlines putting a glow stick onto a Roomba. But to answer your question, the advantage to the UV hammer design is that there are very few sites not exposed to UV directly with line of sight. If it's in an operating room and, for example, the undersurface of the OR table pad it's not direct line of sight, so it won't be exposed. You won't get a germ kill. And so it'll take 2 passes. You just flip the pad over and you get the other side. So in the operating room, there are very few, if any, that aren't direct line of sight. And again, our focus is on commonly touched surfaces as opposed to every last surface. For example, we don't need to get the ceiling corner of the room, because that's not a frequently touched surface. It's not a contaminated surface. So the focus is on those contaminated surfaces.
Well, that's helpful. Could you also share a little perspective on what the source of infections usually are in terms of prevalence for these sort of nosocomial incidents? Is it usually contamination from a surface within the operative suite? Is it I can imagine other scenarios, but what does the literature show as being the real source of contamination and infection?
As you know, it's a multifactorial problem, and including patient-host factors. Certainly, contamination from the patient's skin is important. Hematogenous spread can be important, but environmental contamination is felt to be. The problem is when a patient has an infection, it's very hard to play detective and find out the source of that bacteria contamination. But you really have to control what can be controlled. For example, patient factors, you optimize their diabetes, those kinds of things. And environmental contamination is certainly felt to be a contamination source. For example, there has been correlation in operating room environment contamination with frequent door openings, which is sometimes called traffic in the operating room. And many joint surgeons, including myself, say nobody needs to come into that room unless they really have business to do there, because we know that door openings and traffic increase OR contamination. So you try to control the things you can control. And this effectively, as we indicated, is twice as good at disinfecting the operating room as our chemicals, and only taking 20% of the time.
Okay, that's helpful. And I guess my last question relates to the potential necessity or benefit of demonstrating any sort of validation after each room passage. Do you think that that's necessary to validate each time if you're going to have this sort of installed base, or once you do it and you demonstrate and convince to the operators of that facility that you don't need to do it on any regular basis in terms of QA?
That's a really good question. And the answer is, what are they doing for QA with chemicals now? And the answer is nothing. So, if we provide some kind of QA, it will be a step ahead of chemicals. We have a mandatory operator training course where they're really trained with these color changing dots that we put in 50 locations around the room. And then ORs are generally set up similarly. So once they understand how to disinfect 50 or 60 spots in an OR, the nice thing about UV over chemicals is UV disperses, whereas chemicals don't. And once they're trained, it becomes very routine and rote for them.
Okay, thank you very much. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bruder. And thank you, Dr. Kreidenberg, for your answers to the questions. Let's now go to Audrey Beckman. Now, Audrey has a special background in quality initiatives. And this sounds like, Audrey, something that could be right up your alley of experience. Look forward to your questions and comments.
Thanks, Tony. Well, first, I'm going to ask a business question. The stage of development that you're at, and if you've got units deployed in hospital or clinic settings right now, how many?
Thanks for asking that. We are relatively new in healthcare. We have about a dozen in the field for trials, both inside and outside of healthcare, because there are a lot of applications outside of healthcare. As I mentioned, we did that independent study at a hospital. We want to really repeat additional hospital use cases and do further validation studies of our superiority over chemicals at major institutions. That's one of the things we'd like to raise money for, because those studies are expensive and they have to go through an IRB, et cetera, to really have these things done properly. So we think 2022 is going to be a very big year for us.
Great, thanks for that answer. Could you give me an idea of what regulatory process you've gone through or continue to prepare for?
That's a great question, because one of the things that plague the UV industry, and I think our biggest challenge, is that there are no standards, there are zero regulations for ultraviolet disinfection equipment. And on the one hand, the good news is we don't have to deal with the FDA because it's not a medical device. The bad news is there are a lot of players who have machines. I say anybody with a wire stripper and some electrical tape is in the UV business now. And there are no standards. We are a company that is pushing for high standards. In 2021, I published an article in the Journal of the National Institutes of Standards and Technology with an infectious disease professor from Yale, calling for standards of disinfecting patient rooms using real bacteriological samples and not just giving the appearance of disinfection, but validating actual disinfection. We want a high patient-centric standard because we know we can meet and exceed that standard. We also know the other companies cannot.
Well, I'm very impressed with your attention to user needs and the thoroughness of the design to solve the business issues as well. Increasing throughput through the OR is a tremendous goal. So I really look forward to hearing more about this. And I'm going to ask a question now that relates to the way customers might be receiving your pitch, and that is, what reasons would they give for not choosing your device at this time?
That's a good question. I think the problem is that people are unfamiliar with UV's effectiveness, and I think that's the hurdle to overcome. That's why I'd mentioned doing real studies at big institutions and really showing exactly how UV works and how it's effective. For example, there are no superbugs. There's no organism that's ever shown resistance to ultraviolet. So MRSA is not a problem. Some of these other VRE, it's not a problem at all. It also kills viruses. It also disinfects the air between the lamp and the target surface. So it's really, and chemicals can't do that. So it's really an education process. And as I'd mentioned in the video, we went from the surgical scrub brush to the quick alcohol over the last 10 years. And those studies were done showing that, hey, a quick alcohol rub is as good as a 5-minute scrub. But what we're showing with the UV hammer is that it's twice as good as the chemicals and only taking 20% of the time. So we need more validation studies, and that education process, I think, is the key to your question.
Great. Thank you for this important work.
Thank you.
Audrey, thank you very much for your questions, and Dr. Kreidenberg, your answers. Now let's go to Mike Sherman for the next set of questions.
Thank you, Tony. Dr. Kreidenberg and Elliot, congratulations. This is a really impressive technology. It's impressive because it's so effective and it's so deployable, so manageable. I have a couple of questions, one of which are maybe naive, but can this be titrated? Can this energy be titrated to work on skin or in the wound?
The answer, there are two good questions there. The skin, no. It'll cause a sunburn. Same thing with the eyes that need to be protected. You may have noticed that there's this proprietary polycarbonate shield that we use that completely blocks the UV light because you don't want to do skin and eye exposure. There are some wavelengths of UV light that we're not currently using that have been explored in disinfecting wounds. And again, it's interesting. The problem with UV is that there are a lot of shadows, especially at the microscopic level. And I would worry about, for example, in a fracture, for example, where there are going to necessarily be a lot of shadows inside the wound. I would just as soon pour a bunch of dilute betadine on the wound and wait for a few minutes and just know that I'm killing everything in there. So that may not be the best solution.
No, thank you. Are there ways to make this a permanent installation in an operating room? So sort of an automated deployment of the technology?
There are two ways to answer that question. There's some ORs that use UV in the ceiling. The problem with that is that there are necessarily going to be a lot of shadows. For example, one of the things about our device, it goes from horizontal to vertical, so you can optimize the angle of incidence and keep those lamps parallel to the surface. If you have a ceiling mounted unit, for example, it's not going to get the sides of the tables because the rays are just going parallel to the surface and it just won't work. So that's one problem. We have been talking to robotic companies. And in fact, our first patents were on a fully automated device that would do this. what we found is that the automation, the full robotics are very expensive. They consume a lot of battery power, finicky, they go wrong. And the nice thing about an individual, a trained operator, is that they're not the highest paid employees in the hospital. And they're really good at pattern recognition and getting the UV where it needs to be. We've just found that the human is superior to the robot with current technology. But our patents do cover a fully automated unit.
Fascinating. So you mentioned your desire to have standards. Have you explored the ASTM as a possible place to have standards developed? They generate a lot of these.
Yes, we have looked at that as well as ANSI, and I've recently been put on an ISO technical committee for this purpose, for evaluating standards. So we're on it. Perfect. And as you probably know, standards are a difficult long-term proposition. And we're probably 2 years from having standards, and we've been pushing them as hard as we can for patient benefit.
Yeah. I've been part of that process. It's painful. It's long. But what I've always told the engineers I've worked with is that the guy who writes it has the most say over what's in it. So I would encourage to continue with that effort. I guess my last question is, are there other industries you're going to target? I mean, would this have application? It would have application in the food service industry, and there are probably others.
Yes, we have, as we said, we started in aviation, other public spaces, public transportation, as well as gyms, schools, even semiconductor factories we've deployed units into, preschools, prisons. You know, the market is really good. And it's interesting, each environment has its own set of target microorganisms, its own set of standards as to what log reduction or sterilization level is required. And again, there are no standards, and we're learning. We mentioned that we've coupled with Honeywell, and that's not just for the aviation market, but their building technologies. This is a centerpiece of their smart building technologies portfolio. So yeah, we really think there are applications outside of healthcare that frankly are bigger than healthcare. But my orientation of this pitch is about the operating room.
Well, that's fascinating. Thank you very much. This is really impressive.
Well, Michael, thank you very much for your questions. And Dr. Kreidenberg, sounds like you might soon be leaving the orthopedic surgery profession to pursue the very many opportunities that exist through Dimer UV. So congratulations on the steps that you've taken so far. At Viscogliosi Brothers, we have invested in and built more than 30 companies in the orthopedic space. We've exited now, as of today, 18 of those businesses. And what I would say about those exits is the ones that were most successful used regulation as a means of blocking competition. And I was very impressed by your thoughtful commentary of recognizing that there is very little to no regulation in the space, yet you have an ability to create a competitive advantage and be a first mover by implementing and requiring regulation. So this is, I think, a very smart direction for you to pursue, given the experience we have in creating value by doing just exactly the same thing. And also, I recognized in answering some of your commentary that you have a 4 log kill. Am I correct with that?
6 log, 99.9999%.
Okay, that's even better. That's a fantastically high kill ratio. So that's also going to be very important because that can't well be documented by other means of disinfection. So before we go to the audience for questions, I have a couple quick ones for you. First, as Viscogliosi Brothers, we invest under 5 investment themes today. Infection control is one of them. It seems like your business model is differentiated, it's scalable, and you're addressing something that's really important, lowering the cost of healthcare. So in lowering the cost of healthcare, it is important to demonstrate the dollars saved. So what clinical trials are you conducting that demonstrate the dollars saved?
I think there are a few ways to look at the cost savings. Number one, if we can reduce HAIs, that's going to be a huge cost savings and value. The reality is it's easy to show an increased level of decontamination. It's very difficult statistically to show a difference in postoperative infection rates. For example, if you wanted to reduce an infection rate from 1% for joint replacement down to 0.75%, which would be a laudable goal, the statistics require 36,000 cases. So it's an impossibility to really demonstrate that. But it's a matter of time saving of employee costs because it's so fast compared to chemicals. That would be an immediate benefit to people. It's also an environmentally friendly technology compared to chemicals. It's sustainable. So that's how we address that.
Thank you for addressing that question. Now it's time to go to our audience and ask them, you, what is your opinion of this direction? What do you think? Is this a game-changing technology, or is there more work to do here? I'll now turn the program over to Robin Young, founder of RRY Publications.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Dr. Kreidenberg and you and Dimer UV. Indeed, it is up to our audience. What do you think? We're going to have a poll here, take about 30 seconds. And actually, before I do the polling, somebody, we had a comment in the chat section. Thank you and congrats. Scrubbing back in after another surgery, but I feel a little anxious about all the critters that are still around without your wonderful system, Dr. K. That's pretty good. Thank you, Robin, for organizing this. All right. And then we had a question. Can you shine the UV hammer into the wound to sterilize the wound? I think Dr. K answered that very well. Okay. Well, let's go to the polling. And what do you think? You've got 30 seconds to answer. Do you think this is a winner, a future game changer, challenge standard of care, promising and needs more work? Another 20 seconds to go. Wow, very good. We're getting, almost feels like a horse race. There we go. And again, if you want to contact the company, please do so. And we will stop the poll, share the results. 30% think it's a future game changer. I would have to agree. I think 45% says challenge the standard of care for sure. Promising, a quarter thinks it's promising and would need more work. Well, I think that's very, very good. 75% puts you well above average. Congratulations to Dimer UV.